Good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gotti Schwartz coming to you from Los Angeles. And here are some of the stories we're following tonight. The Mexican government says 2 of the 4 Americans kidnapped are dead.
The 2 survivors have since been repatriated back to the United States.
Now, we're going to have the latest on the attack that happened only about a mile away from the U.S. border crossings. And as California digs out from its record snowstorm, it is now bracing for another concern, flooding. Plus, do all these mid-air scares have you a little freaked out about flying? Don't worry. Today, we are talking to Captain Sully Sullenberger, known for pulling off the miracle on the Hudson, and he's going to put it all into context. Then, as we look to the future of policing, the debate over robot canines is heating up, with some of the new police dogs looking like something straight out of Black Mirror. And just as storm clouds here in California have started to part, the West Coast is getting ready for another round of severe weather, this time in the form of an atmospheric river system, raising big concerns about intense flooding and even more damage. We're talking especially in areas where they are already buried under snow, like the San Bernardino Mountains. Now, to give you a sense of the layout here, the San Bernardino Mountains are just east of L.A. Crestline is a community nestled in those mountains at an elevation of about 4,600 feet. That's where communities are working together before this next storm hits.
We're up here removing the snow from my roof today. We've been removing the snow from some of the neighboring buildings. There's some residents that are stuck down the hill. They asked us to check on their properties, see if we could get some of the snow off and just take some of the weight off.
Now, authorities have opened up highways for both lanes of traffic today, but as you can see, anyone trying to go back up the mountain is being asked to show ID and proof of residency. Meanwhile, people higher up the mountain say they are still stuck and still waiting for more snowplows.
So my street is only partly plowed, and I've had no running water since the beginning of the storm. I have no phone or internet in my house. I can't get off the mountain because my car is buried.
NBC News correspondent Dana Griffith joins me now. Dana, it seems like the sun is on your face. There's a little bit of progress there. Some roads are clear. The highway is now clear as well. Is there a sense of relief, or is this the calm before another storm?
Well, I can tell you that residents who have finally been let back in are relieved, but those who live up in the higher elevations are still very frustrated because officials say only about 50% of those secondary roads, which a lot of people live on, have yet to be plowed. I spoke to one guy who said this was the first time he was actually able to drive into town because his roads hadn't been plowed for several days. And he said up until now, he's been walking in. So it's still very frustrating for people. And for those who were trying to get in, like yesterday, we spoke to the only veterinarian for this community. And she said that she told, law enforcement and officials that, hey, I've got animals that need to be fed, some that are not doing so well. And take a listen to what she had to say.
Let me tell you guys, it is awful up here just trying to drive in. The roads are terrible. The snowpack is so high. There's so many damaged vehicles. I mean, this is not a joke. Someone needs to come in here and help us and declare this on a federal level, not just a state level.
And a lot of people are wondering what else is the county going to do to help them. The county says, hey, look, we are providing as many resources as we can. And I think some residents are very understanding about that, but others are very frustrated because, many have been snowed in for several days, Gotti.
And Dana, I know that more severe weather is on the way. Forecasters have been warning about that atmospheric river that's headed our way, but I can't help but think of all those roofs with so much snow already on them. How are they going to hold up as the snow gets even heavier?
Well, that's the big question. We've seen a lot of people trying to shovel snow off their roofs, and that's the big concern because we've already got a lot of snowpack that's just sitting. As you mentioned earlier, the sun is out. It's starting to melt. So, I mean, if people can get the snow off their roof, that would be ideal. But we're probably going to see more of those caved-in structures like we've seen throughout this week, unfortunately, just because that rain is going to make that snow heavy. Gotti?
And what are the chances that we start to see a lot more snow where you are right now?
I'm not sure if we're going to see a lot more this year. Nevada is actually supposed to get 1 to 3 feet of snow. I think the bigger concern here is going to be the rain, which is going to be pretty warm. And once that snow melts, there's a potential for flash flooding. So that's the biggest concern here in Southern California. You know, we've been really inundated, even in the Los Angeles County area. So people are going to be waiting to see how the storm is going to progress. And hopefully it doesn't make things worse here in Crestline. Gotti?
Yeah. Flash flooding on top of all this, hopefully not. Dana, thanks so much. Now, there is one San Bernardino couple with a really wonderful winter story to tell coming out of this storm. The birth of their beautiful daughter. You can see her right there with snow in the background. Brady and Crystal Wade had to rush to the hospital on February 23rd, some 50 miles away after Crystal started having contractions. They plowed through high snow to get to the hospital, and then they had to come back home on those same roads.
Here's the road we've worked on, and this is what we walked through to give an idea. I can't go all the way up, unfortunately, right now, but it goes up there and then turns another 400 yards and then goes down 3 blocks. But this gives you an idea of what my wife walked through while she was holding our 2-day-old and I was holding our 4-year-old. And this is how much snow we've gotten in Lake Arrowhead.
Incredible. The Wade family joins us right now. Braid Wade, Crystal Wade, their daughter, who was poetically named Winter. So good to see you guys. First question, how's Winter doing there?
She's doing wonderful. We're very lucky. We have a healthy, happy baby girl.
And it looks like she's sleeping. Is she sleeping okay?
She is. She is passed out. She is a good little sleeper.
Oh, thank goodness. I know that you guys are not in San Bernardino right now. You're not at your home. You drove to Arizona yesterday. Tell us about why you decided to do that.
Yeah, the saga kind of continues with this storm for us. We got back. We started digging out. We finally got access to our home, and our streets were plowed about a day and a half ago. And we started smelling gas around the outside of our property. So we've had a lot of house fires up there because of snowfall onto gas meters, frozen pipes, things like that. We called the gas company, and we actually evacuated and are now in Arizona with in-laws as we speak.
Wow. So as soon as you smelt that gas, you knew something was up, and you guys headed back down the mountain.
Oddly enough, there's been enough gas leaks up there that it's pretty common when you're driving around the community to pick it up, but it really intensified. And so we have a couple of unoccupied homes on our access road, and we didn't know exactly where it was coming from, but we definitely noticed that it was amping up in terms of the intensity of the smell, and we just decided it was time. So that video that you're watching right now, we cleared by hand and snowblower yesterday and left last night.
Now, this is a story that you're going to tell Winter for the rest of her life. It's crisis after crisis after crisis. Was there any moment on the trek up with this newborn that you were most terrified, or did you guys just handle it in stride? I mean, the fact that she's sitting right there looking as peaceful as a little angel, you strike me as the family that isn't rattled by much.
I kind of felt like we're in a war zone with snow. It was really overwhelming. I mean, the berms are all higher than the street signs there. So it's very overwhelming. And just to get out of our access road, we spent all day. So it was intense.
It's interesting because you eventually get to the point where you're just kind of coming out of fight or flight. And that took a week or more. Once the plows, albeit late, arrived, that helped us relax, and all of a sudden you feel the aches, you feel the tiredness, it starts to set in, and then of course a gas leak. So I don't know if we'll eventually get relaxed. It feels better to be down here right now, but we're going to be heading back up for potential flooding here in a day or so, and it's back up to protect our house. We're like many residents up there. We're dealing with cracks in our roof. We're dealing with snow loads. So it's serious. We have to get up and we have to protect our property, and a lot of people are in the same boat right now, unfortunately.
Before this atmospheric river sweeps through, were you able to get some of the snow off your roof?
Yeah, we got a bit off. The topography of our area is really challenging because if you start getting onto your main peaks, you're going to be dealing with potential 30, 40, 50-foot falls. Luckily, we have a very heavy slope on our roof, but you literally have to throw ropes. You have to throw whatever you can up on there and try and get as much of the snow load as you can. But like I said, we're in the same boat. We have cracks in our ceiling too because of it. You just try and do the best you can, but you also don't want to fall off trying to, potentially save your roof. So it's a rock and a hard place right now for many of the residents up there.
Well, I hope you guys can soak up some of that sun in Arizona, and we're praying for your house and little winter there. The Wade family, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having us.
Let's turn now to the kidnappings of 4 Americans who crossed into Mexico for a medical procedure. According to the State Department, 2 of them were murdered, and the U.S. is now working to bring back those bodies. The other 2 are back on American soil. One of them was hurt, and according to a Mexican official, he was shot in the leg. We're also learning the names of the 4 victims: Latavia Washington McGee, Eric Williams, Shaid Woodard, and Zindell Brown. Joining us now is NBC's Ken Delaney. And so, Ken, we know one suspect has been arrested, allegedly the man found guarding the 4 victims. What else do we know about where they were found?
Gotti, they were found in a wooded house outside the city, Mexican officials said, after they had been moved 3 times. And they were found with the help of U.S. intelligence and law enforcement support to the Mexican authorities. And then they were whisked, the survivors were whisked in ambulances across the border, and they're believed to be at a hospital in Brownsville, Texas. As you said, Eric Williams said to be shot in the leg, grievously injured. Latavia McGee, apparently not physically injured, but obviously gone through an incredibly traumatic experience, and their 2 friends killed. And let's remember that these South Carolina residents crossed the border so that McGee could undergo a cosmetic surgical procedure, which is obviously a lot cheaper in Mexico. We're hearing from family members that some of them were a little concerned that their loved ones were going into a dangerous part of Mexico, but not overly so. This is just, apparently, according to law enforcement sources, a horrible case of mistaken identity. The cartel gunmen attacked the vehicle containing these Americans as it crossed the border. According to one theory, Gotti, the FBI may believe that the cartel thought these were Haitian smugglers encroaching on the cartel's territory. Because let's remember, the cartels, not only are they in the drug business, they're in the people smuggling business. And now the FBI is working furiously to try to identify who committed these awful acts and bring them to justice, Gotti.
Now, Ken, do we know if the 2 that were killed right there when that shooting took place, or were they killed after they were taken to that house and basically held?
Mexican authorities said that at least one of the 2 were killed instantly. And if you remember that video that we all saw with the gunman dragging the Americans into the white pickup truck, you could pretty clearly see that one of the bodies was lifeless, and there was a big blood trail. It's not entirely clear, but it appears that those 2 may have died, if not right at the scene, shortly thereafter. Just a horrible, horrible situation. The loved ones having to watch this video before they even heard from the U.S. government that their relatives were involved.
Now, I know up on Capitol Hill, there are some lawmakers that are talking about labeling cartels terrorist organizations in response to this. If they do that, what kind of ramifications could that have? And do you think that might be likely?
So this is a long-standing debate, actually, predating this incident, Gotti. And, former Attorney General Bill Barr wrote an op-ed the other day advocating a much tougher approach to the cartels. Labeling them terrorist organizations would empower a lot of different things. It would empower potential military action against the cartels in Mexico. It would empower the government to charge anyone who sold any cartel member so much as a car in the United States with a very serious felony of material support to terrorism. But it also brings a huge consequence. I mean, it would absolutely tremendously escalate the U.S. government approach to a sovereign country, Mexico, that is very sensitive about U.S. forces, U.S. law enforcement operating on its soil. And, it sort of begs the question of why exactly are the cartels so powerful and rich and well-funded, and why do they have so many arms? it's because of the U.S. consumption of drugs, U.S. and European. That's what's fueling all of this. And so the idea that we're just going to militarize this problem strikes a lot of critics as the wrong solution. But look, it's gaining currency in Washington because there is a sense that the Mexican government, particularly under this president, Lopez Obrador, is not doing enough, and the cartels are operating with impunity in large parts of Mexico. Gotti.
Ken Delanian, thanks so much.
You bet.
And yet another mid-flight scare, this time on a Boston-bound plane from Los Angeles. That's where some insane video shows a passenger trying to open an emergency door and then attacking a flight attendant with a broken spoon. Thankfully, passengers and crew members tackled the guy. One person on board recorded all of it. Take a look.
So where are they? Where's Homeland Security? Pull the gun! Pull the gun! Where are they?
Started hearing his voice get louder and louder. He was clearly agitated.
Sorry, since I'm taking over this plane, dude, I'm telling you right now. Oh no. I'm telling you right now. Okay, yeah, you can't get by that door.
There were probably 4 or 5 men that restrained him on the ground. And I think that's how we all felt. We just, wanted to get off the plane.
And 32-year-old Francisco Torres was arrested shortly after landing. He faces federal charges of interference with the flight crew using a dangerous weapon. Torres has pleaded not guilty. With me now is Ambassador Sully Sullenberger, known for landing a U.S. Airways plane on the Hudson River in 2009. He's also the former representative of the U.S. to the International Civil Aviation Organization. Captain, Ambassador, welcome. First off, you are the best person to ask this question to. What do passengers not see when something like this happens?
Well, they don't see that on some flights there are air marshals who might be able to help in a situation like this. But it's gratifying to know that so many passengers jump up right away and begin to quell the situation to assist the flight crew. But it's very concerning that these kinds of issues occur. I think part of the problem is that all the stressors, all the divisions in our society, many people bring on the airplane with them. And if they're already stressed, it doesn't take too much more to set them off. And it's these kinds of incidents, any kind of a threat or to safety or security on an airplane flight is a very serious matter. And there should be an effective passenger no-fly list for people who engage in this kind of behavior. They should not be back on an airplane anytime soon.
And Ambassador, over the last couple of weeks here, we have seen it all. We've seen bird strikes. We've seen massive turbulence. Now we're seeing this. When something like that happens, when you have a mid-air emergency, what does the pilot know and what does the crew know, and how do you communicate that, and how do you keep everybody safe and calm?
Well, first of all, we rely on our training and good communication skills. We use the cabin interphone. So the flight attendants will pick up a handset in the cabin, ring the cockpit, the captain or the first officer answers, and they have a verbal communication. So to keep each other informed. And of course, the pilots are behind that locked cockpit door to keep them and the airplane safe. But they have to work together along with alerting the ground. If it's a dire enough situation, the captain may decide to divert, make an emergency descent to the nearest airport where security officials, police can come on the airplane and take the aggressor off.
And separately, the FAA is now calling for a safety summit after at least those 5 recent close calls where planes nearly collided at airports across the country. How close are we talking? How concerned are you about seeing anytime a plane gets too close to another?
Well, these incidents are canaries in the coal mine, and they're warning us that there are gaps, there are risks that we are not aggressively remedying on a daily basis, and we need to do a much better job. And so I'm glad they're having the safety summit. We need to take a close look at all our policies and procedures, see where there are gaps and begin to fill them so that these events don't keep on happening more often.
Speaking of gaps, you wrote in the Chicago Tribune a few days ago, don't cheapen pilot training and experience. We see a massive shortage of pilots. What do you see as a problem?
I'm not sure if the pilot shortage is massive. It's beginning, but if we do the right things and focus on providing well-defined pathways to get pilots all the way through it with the knowledge, skill, experience, and judgment that this profession requires, then we will have sufficient numbers of highly qualified and experienced people to do these jobs. But right now, there's a lot of focus on this, and a lot of people are trying to find ways to cheapen and quicken pilot training, and that is absolutely the wrong approach. It's dumb, dangerous, and unnecessary. So we need to be finding better ways to equip pilots with the knowledge, skill, and experience, the judgment they need, and get them on the line as soon as we can without cutting corners.
And we all hope every time we get on a plane that we've got Captain Sully Sullenberger flying us. Captain, thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
And coming up, we are going to show you new video from the riot on Capitol Hill and break down why it doesn't quite reveal anything new. And later, the White House could move to detain migrant families, what this means for the border crisis. We'll be right back, so stay tuned. There are 44,000 hours of security video from the January 6th insurrection. And after countless court cases against protesters from that day, we have seen a lot of it. But this week, the House Speaker turned all the video over to Fox News. And now there are some clips circulating that might have you thinking, wait, I don't think I've seen that yet. Here's what caught my eye. Remember this guy? This guy is known as the QAnon shaman. And some of the newly released footage of this guy is raising some eyebrows. Take a look.
Virtually every moment of his time inside the Capitol was caught on tape. The tapes show that Capitol Police never stopped Jacob Chansley. They helped him. They acted as his tour guides. Here's video of Chansley in the Senate chamber. Capitol Police officers take him to multiple entrances.
And that was selective editing from Tucker Carlson. It's important to remember that just 20 seconds of 40,000 plus hours of security video was just shown. We don't know how it was edited together or whether anything that was removed may have provided a fuller context. But here to discuss this now with us is Evie Pomporis. She's a former U.S. Secret Service special agent and author of the book, Becoming Bulletproof, Protect Yourself, Read People, Influence Situations, and Live Fearlessly. Evie, can you help us make sense of this? Why did law enforcement act the way they did there? Some people might see that and say, wait, this seems very, very odd.
It does seem odd from that standpoint. So there could be a couple of things. They might have been trying to show them the way out, possibly, when they were showing those doorways. I think although this footage that is being released is new and some of it does seem quite peaceful, it doesn't change the fact of what did occur. You had individuals break into the Capitol. You're not supposed to be there. That's bar none. So it really doesn't change anything. Were some people peaceful? Yes, but they're not meant to be on the grounds. And let's not forget that we had the vice president actually hardening in a room. We had people who were afraid for their lives. We did have political figures, members of Congress, locking themselves up in their offices. Like, it does not negate what actually happened. Now, could some people argue, why didn't we see this footage? There could be that sentiment, but the whole thing collectively still remains the same.
And Evie, I want to show you another bit of footage that's getting some attention. It shows rioters just walking around, taking selfies, lining up to check out different rooms. Playing devil's advocate here. Let's say some of these people who went in did not destroy anything. They just looked around or took pictures. From a law enforcement perspective, is that allowed just like that at the Capitol, especially given everything else that was happening?
No, these are secure facilities. We would secure, as a Secret Service agent, we secured the White House. If people broke into the White House and started taking selfies and going into the Oval Office and doing all sorts of things, they're not supposed to be there. So no, it does not change anything. It's not the museum, right? This is a landmark. This is the Capitol. They're not supposed to be there, although they may not be doing anything aggressive in those photos and those images and that footage. That's not the point. The point is they are not meant to be there. They are trespassing. They are not supposed to be going through those corridors unescorted. These establishments are meant to be secure. This is where government functions. This is where you have also high-profile people who have security details. You're not supposed to be intermingling them with the public. You don't know who also these people are coming in. They're not MAG. They haven't gone through magnetometers. They haven't been checked. They haven't been background checked. They haven't been name checked. You have to understand at some of these places, Capitol, the White House, certain structures, there are access points where there's security barriers, if you will, and there are certain people allowed in certain areas, and there's certain background checks and criteria that have to be met for people to get access to certain areas. So although, yes, they look like they're walking through peacefully, it doesn't change the situation.
And the Capitol Police Chief was pretty upset over Fox's depiction of the videos that we saw. He said the network conveniently cherry-picked from the calmer moments, adding that it fails to provide context about the chaos and violence that happened before or during these less tense moments. As a former Secret Service agent, what do people need to know when they see this stuff on television or online?
I think what you have to know is that this is the Capitol and people weren't supposed to be here. We have to, this peaceful footage does not negate the other footage that we're seeing. Now, could somebody argue why are they only playing and looping over and over and over again the aggressive footage, the footage of people breaking in, people rioting? You could make that argument, but it still doesn't change what occurred. And as far as the conduct for Capitol Police, yes, he's right to be upset because this is what they were supposed to protect. I would argue that he should call out and talk to the, lay out and explain why some of his police officers behaved the way they did. I would argue this. You are also dealing with civilians. And so when you're in that function, if people maybe aren't being aggressive and because they're being overrun, maybe they're trying to figure out a way to calmly and peaceably push people out. If you're dealing with people who are just walking through, as we saw in the footage before, maybe there's a way, instead of putting hands on people, because the moment you put hands on people, things escalate, of maybe getting somebody to acquiesce, to comply, to follow instructions, and get them to leave.
I mean, this reminds me of this time recently in Santa Monica. There were some riots a few years ago, and I remember I was covering those riots, and there was a moment in which my photographer and we were standing right next to I think it was like a Foot Locker or a Skechers, and there were looters inside. They were lighting fires, and they were just pulling out boxes. They were loading them into cars, and then they were taking off. The SWAT team came in, and I remember the SWAT team coming in with their guns down, and then they started directing traffic of the looters. They could see what was happening, and at first I was very confused because I was like, why aren't they arresting these people? But there were dozens and dozens of people all around. And then the fire department came in. And so it was odd because the SWAT team was directing traffic of these people that were actively stealing and burning this store. And they were just letting it all happen so that the fire department could get in. Long story short, it just seemed like there was chaos and there was even more chaos. Is that something that happens in these types of situations where, all of a sudden officers find themselves in an unexpected situation and then they have to kind of make audibles as they happen?
You bring up a really good point. Can I ask you a quick question? This scene that you saw, how many looters were there? How many rioters? And then how many SWAT team members?
There were 2 SWAT team members that made their way inside of the Foot Locker or the Skechers or whatever it was. And then there were probably 10 to 15 people inside that were just smashing things. And there were probably about 20 to 30 people running around outside of the store as like pandemonium went on everywhere. Okay, you just answered it. 2 members of the SWAT, and you've got about approximately 35 people. What are 2 people going to do? Are you going to open fire? Are you going to start fighting with people? What they did is probably the best choice they could make, to try to get people to get out of the situation, not put hands on people, just try to evacuate, clear the area, and do it as peaceably as possible. Sometimes becoming aggressive with civilians, even if they're looting and doing these things, actually heightens and makes the situation worse. If you had maybe 40 police officers, it could have been a different scenario, even 30. But if there's 2, they made the best decision that they could in that time. And yes, you do call audibles. You have to have in that moment decide, what do I want to do? And there's only 2 of us. Do I want to sit and fight and brawl with 20, 25 people? The other thing is, you're armed. You're armed. Are you going to start shooting at civilians? You're not going to want to do that unless
unless you're an imminent threat or somebody else is an imminent threat, you're not going to do that. So there is that part of you that when you're making a decision as a law enforcement officer, is what am I about to do going to escalate the situation, going to make it worse, going to cause more harm, or can I just get these individuals out of here? Can I get them to comply? Can I do this as peaceably as possible? Capitol Police were completely outnumbered on that day. They needed more help, more assets, more resources. So I think a lot of the footage of where we're seeing them kind of pull back is because, yes, they weren't sure how to handle that situation. This was unprecedented.
Thanks so much for joining us. Some important context there. And still ahead, this brings a whole new meaning to the term "see you later, alligator," because an alligator that disappeared from a Texas zoo is returned 20 years later. That story is straight ahead. But first, you got to see this. A man was pulled from a burning vehicle in Austin, Texas, Sunday night, which is pretty extraordinary. What's even more amazing, the person who pulled him to safety was Minnesota Vikings wide receiver KJ Osborne. Osborne says he was riding in an Uber when he saw the burning vehicle. They pulled over and were about to call 911 when they realized that there was no time. They had to act immediately. The Uber driver, Osborne, and two Good Samaritans got the man out with only minor injuries. We'll be right back. And it's time now for some of the big headlines we're watching tonight. Today, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell told the Senate to expect more interest rate hikes and that they're likely going to be higher than previously thought in order to fight inflation. A Norfolk Southern train conductor was killed in an accident with a dump truck. It happened early this morning in Cleveland. Police say the conductor was outside on the front left side of the train car when it hit the dump truck. This is the third incident involving the railroad company in Ohio in just over a month. A social media influencer has pleaded guilty to getting over $1 million in pandemic relief. Prosecutors say Danielle Miller used the money to help fund a lavish lifestyle. She now faces 3 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of aggravated identity theft. She's free on a $100,000 bond. And an alligator believed to have been stolen from a Texas zoo 20 years ago has now been returned. The 8-foot gator was found while a game warden was investigating another case. The zoo thinks that the alligator was stolen when it was an egg or a hatchling by a person who might have been a zoo volunteer. Now, do you remember Boy Meets World? Well, now he's a man and he's running for Congress. Ben Savage will be running as a Democrat to represent the Los Angeles area district. He's looking to replace Congressman Adam Schiff, who's seeking Dianne Feinstein's Senate seat. And California's Governor Gavin Newsom says his state is done with Walgreens. The decision comes after the popular drugstore chain said it would not distribute abortion pills in states where Republican officials have threatened legal action. Marianne Favreau from our Bay Area affiliate has more.
We talked with Walgreens shoppers today, and many of them told us they felt the governor had gone too far by targeting the company for boycott. Governor Gavin Newsom tweeted today, California won't be doing business with at Walgreens or any company that cowers to the extremists and puts women's lives at risk. We're done. Today, Bay Area Walgreens shoppers responded.
I don't think you should intervene in people's personal and medical affairs or try to influence a business.
The government should let Walgreens do what they want to do.
The governor's move comes after Walgreens told 21 Republican attorneys general that it would not sell the abortion pill mifepristone in their states. We reached out to the governor's office for specifics on the ban, including clarification for how much business the state does with the company. A spokesman issued this statement saying California is reviewing all relationships between Walgreens and the state. We will not pursue business with companies that cave to right-wing bullies pushing their extremist agenda or companies that put politics above the health of women and girls. We also reached out to Walgreens, which said it is not commenting on the governor's tweet, but the company added it is committed to selling mifepristone where it is legal to do so under state and federal law. Cal State East Bay history and communication professor Nolan Higdon says the governor's move may also be a reflection of his political aspirations.
I think it's a pretty bold move to target one company over one decision that it's doing in different states. Given that he's the governor of California and he is focusing on what they're doing outside of the state, I think, again, that's a clear indication that he's looking toward a 2024 presidential run.
The governor's move could potentially impact the relationship covered California and Medi-Cal have with Walgreens. In San Jose, Marianne Favreau, NBC Bay Area News.
And now to an NBC News investigation into some key evidence from a serial case that has haunted the Pacific Northwest for years. From the early 1980s to the 90s, dozens of women were kidnapped and murdered by the Green River Killer, who was finally identified in 2001 when officials arrested Gary Ridgway, crediting a breakthrough DNA technique for the result for their arrest. But now, years later, NBC's digital team dug through interviews and thousands of pages of documents, only to find that evidence left on some of the earliest victims was never analyzed. NBC's Tom Winter has that story.
Patricia Yellow Robe was the last of 49 women to be killed by one of America's most notorious serial killers. Now, an NBC investigation asks whether she'd be alive today if not for potentially missed clues found a decade earlier. It all started in 1982.
For a long time, people in the Seattle area and elsewhere in the Pacific Northwest have had a string of unsolved murders on their minds. They're called the Green River murders.
The victims, many on the run from home, some sex workers, found one after the other.
37 women have died, 9 missing, all thought to be victims of the same killer.
It was the work of Gary Ridgway, arrested in 2001, pleading guilty, connected to some of his victims not just with DNA, but with microscopic paint. Former FBI investigator Steve Kramer studied the case.
There's some reporting that we have that suggests that there was some evidence that perhaps at some point was not accurately analyzed or not analyzed at all, that perhaps could have solved that serial killer sooner. How important was that paint analysis just based on your background of the case?
The paint in that particular case, the investigator, who's a scientist, was tasked with analyzing the paint. They looked at, really, really small particles, like down to the micron level, like 10 microns. He theorized if he's painting trucks, he worked at a Kenworth facility, painting, the commercial, 18-wheeler trucks, and figuring that this paint was floating in the air, it would be on his clothes, and then it would maybe transfer to the victims.
Tom Jensen was one of the case's first investigators.
Well, I began with the Green River Task Force investigation in 1984.
What did you think when you were contacted by NBC, somebody saying that it was possible that the type of analysis that was done here, this paint analysis, could have been done back in the mid-1980s?
I thought it was bullshit. How do I put this?
Jensen says it might have changed the course of the case.
We had a very strong circumstantial case against Gary Ridgway in 1987. What we didn't have was any physical evidence to substantiate the circumstances that we had. Now, had this technology been available to us in 1987, I'm quite certain that based on that paint smear evidence and the circumstantial evidence that we had, certainly we would have had an argument for taking this case to a prosecutor for charges.
According to court records, Ridgway abruptly stopped his killing spree in 1990, but began again in 1998 with Yellow Robe. When her sister Luana was asked if the new revelations make her angry, she tells NBC News, "It's too bad they didn't do what they should have done, but being angry now won't bring my sister back." Ridgway is serving several life sentences for his crimes. In an email to NBC News, the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab says that given the amount of time that's passed since the investigation began, they don't want to speculate on the strategies and tactics used by their forensic investigators so long ago.
Tom Winter, thanks so much. Up next, robot dogs in Los Angeles. We're not talking about pets. We are talking about a police tool. Are they coming to a street near you? That's next. You ever watch a sci-fi show and then you watch the news and then you think, wait a minute, I have seen this before? Well, take a look. On the left is a screenshot from the 2017 episode of Black Mirror. It was about a killer robot, if it rings a bell. On the right is a real-life dog robot. Notice any similarities? Now the LAPD wants a robot dog of their own, but let's be clear, they don't want one that goes on a murderous rampage. LAPD says it would protect officers as well as cut down on police use of lethal force. But critics are concerned that police tech like this will be misused to harm communities of color. Earlier today, the LA City Council delayed a vote to accept a donated robot dog. And with me now is NBC investigative reporter Andrew Blankstein, the man that I always run to anytime there's a high-speed chase going on. We go straight over to your desk. I got to ask, how do you see these robots, if they are approved, being used by the LAPD?
Well, I think it's going to be a limited use if the past is prologue in terms of drones, which were bought from the Seattle Police Department in 2014 and then kind of shelved for a while because of the debate over privacy. You can see kind of the same thing playing out with the robot dog. It's a single robot dog. It's a gift from the Police Foundation that was $280,000. But obviously there's a debate, a vigorous public debate about how they're going to be used and what ultimately it turns into, or we're going to get more of them.
Do you think that this is going to be something where we see, like, instead of canine units, you have an officer with a robot canine, or is this going to be used almost like in bomb squad situations?
Well, it looks like this would be limited to tactical situations. So if there's a barricaded subject, if there's a hostage situation, if there's an active shooter, getting into places where officers or even canines could be put in harm's way or even killed. Same thing with the public. So you can have eyes and ears, because this robot dog would have a capability, or at least the limited capability as it's been defined, in terms of having still photos, audio, and even video, which gives eyes and ears on the ground to police.
So this is kind of like, you know, right now they've got those mechanized tanks, those almost like, they look like little tanks, kind of like Wall-E. Instead of those that are on tracks, you'd have a robot dog that would be able to go upstairs and do that kind of stuff. Is that?
That's right, and manipulate doorknobs or latches, and that's the whole thing. It gives a capability to get into places where the typical bomb squad robot didn't. I mean, some of the controversy about impacts of robots obviously stems from a case where the Dallas Police Department went in. There was a barricaded suspect in a parking garage, and the suspect was accused of killing 5 officers. There was a bomb attached to that robot, and it blew, and the suspect died. And there was a controversy. It was the first time it had happened, and so there was a lot of discussion and debate, which is still carrying forward into this as well.
What do you think the chances are of us seeing this passed here in the city of Los Angeles in the next year?
It's hard to say. You know, the drone debate played out over several years. So they've already today decided that they are going to delay this decision by the full city council until May. Now, the police commission and also the council's public safety committee did approve it. So there is a sense that there's support, but there is a public component that is talking about, you know, privacy issues and spying. And so as that plays out, I think we should get it in a year, but it could go longer.
Could go longer. Andrew Blankstein, thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Now to a remarkable story about perseverance in the pursuit of justice. Decades ago, an imprisoned man wrote a letter to an NBC News producer hoping someone would see through the cracks in his conviction. The two then embarked on a 20-year hunt for answers, and that is still unfolding today. NBC's Lester Holt has the story.
The Sing Sing Correctional Facility houses more than 1,400 prisoners. Each can tell you why they are here.
Dear Mr. Slepian, I spent a lot of time trying.
Some will tell you why they shouldn't be.
I know I don't belong here, but I am a firm believer that everything that happens to us in life is for a purpose.
It was a single letter addressed to Dateline NBC producer Dan Slepian, sent by John Adrian J.J. Velasquez, who was serving a life sentence for the murder of a retired police officer, convicted solely on eyewitness testimony.
And I get a lot of letters, as you know, from people who claim to be innocent. But what was so different about JJ's letter is it was meticulous. It was focused.
Dozens more would follow. Skeptical but curious, Dan paid JJ a visit.
The 12 jury said you're here for a reason. You should be locked up because you committed murder.
That's what they gathered, but they didn't know the whole story, and neither did I at that time.
And there began a 20-year journey. JJ's unbending claim of innocence, Dan's search for the truth, detailed now in the new NBC Studios podcast, Letters from Sing Sing.
What I've learned over the past 2 decades haunts me.
Dan, tell me what Letters from Sing Sing is about.
It's about how and why someone can be wrongfully convicted, but more importantly, you need a bolt of lightning to strike the courthouse door to even get another day in court. That's really what this is about.
JJ gave Dan mountains of case documents and challenged him to prove him guilty.
I knew that he would unveil something that would look odd to him or something that actually proved that I'm innocent. But the thing that he wasn't going to find was any evidence of guilt.
So did you accept the challenge that, okay, I'm going to show your guilt?
He challenged me to prove his guilt, and I accepted the challenge.
Dan tracked down the key eyewitness. He told Dan he was pressured by police and basically picked out JJ at random after looking at more than 1,800 mugshots.
I don't know if I really picked out the right person.
20-plus years in, Dan is still unearthing bombshells, recently interviewing a juror in the case.
In my heart of hearts, I knew he was innocent.
She walked into the room and started crying.
The jury had been sequestered for 3 days, and she told Dan she only voted guilty because of peer pressure.
What you're essentially saying to me is that JJ was convicted not necessarily because of the facts or the evidence, but because the jury was tired and wanted to go home. Is that true?
I'd have to say yes. I think that's the truth, yes.
So why is that critical right now?
When people listen to this podcast, they're going to hear a mountain of evidence that that jury never heard that points only one way to his innocence.
Every time Dan gives me a call with new information, I'm impacted the same way. It feels like a stab in the gut sometimes. Had they made a different decision, my life could have been a lot different.
His sentence was commuted in 2021. JJ was released from prison, but is still fighting to clear his name.
I was sentenced to 25 years to life for the crime that I didn't commit. And now I'm being sentenced to an additional term in society.
At a White House forum last fall, JJ got something he didn't expect. You got an apology from the President of the United States.
On behalf of all society, I apologize.
It meant a lot to me because it meant recognition.
Recognition that began with a single letter and a journalist willing to listen.
I am not an advocate for JJ. I am an advocate for truth.
Lester Holt, thank you so much for that story. After the break, kelp wanted, why the demand for seaweed farming is growing. But first, how much would you spend on a box of Girl Scout cookies? Because folks are going nuts for the newest cookie flavor, Raspberry Rally. It's basically a thin mint, but with some raspberry. Some people are willing to spend as much as 1,500% above the $4 to $7 asking price on eBay. A reseller in Rancho Santa Margarita, California, scored $80 for their box. But the Girl Scouts are not happy with those unauthorized sales, so please try to buy your cookies on the up and up. Scouts honor. We'll be right back. And there is a new farming trend, and it's all happening underwater. It's seaweed farming, and it could be one way to solve agricultural challenges caused by climate change. NBC's LX contributor Greg Bledsoe has the story.
The food that we eat is getting more expensive and harder to grow. And part of the reason is because about 90% of the state of California is in some form of drought right now. But what if I told you that part of the farming solution could happen in big cities and involve no fresh water at all?
We got some sea truffle growing in here. It has just a really intense flavor. Right here we have sea lettuce growing. We're growing seaweed for food. You know, it's bathing in seawater all day, which has pretty much all the vitamins and minerals you can imagine, and it takes it in. My name is Tori Polizzi. I'm a seaweed farmer. That's what I do. So we are at Grape Street Pier in downtown San Diego, and we have a seaweed farm going on. A 60 by 20 foot metal frame, which is basically just a large rectangle. And within that frame, we'll have 10 lines. We'll be testing growth measurements. We'll be looking at food safety. They're regenerative. They just keep growing. We're not using any fresh water. We're not using any fertilizers. We're not taking up any land, you know? But we're producing a crop that can grow like 5 times faster than anything else on the planet.
And the seaweed farming industry is growing just as fast. 12 U.S. states plus Puerto Rico now commercially grow seaweed. Maine, for example, has more than 30 farms compared to just a handful 5 years ago. Alaska produced 231,000 pounds of seaweed in 2020, and then more than doubled that a year later.
Right now, there's more energy, more enthusiasm in seaweed farming than I've ever seen. Seaweed farming is really the next frontier in farming. I mean, there's 8 billion people in the world. We're going to have 10 billion people in the world in just a couple of decades. How are we going to feed them? Seaweed farming can be a really easy solution. You know, they're high in protein, high in carbohydrates, low in fat.
And it's a solution catching the attention of ports and local governments around California. Port of San Diego recently invested in seaweed farming, and not just for the food, but also because of seaweed's potential for cleaning the water and capturing carbon.
We're supporting startup companies that are focused on technologies that are helping to clean our environment. That's a model for ports around the world. If we do this right, just like the Santa Clara Valley came to be known as the Silicon Valley, the Port of San Diego and the San Diego Bay could become to be known as the Blue Tech Bay.
We have so much coastal space and so many opportunities. I think this is a good piece of what agriculture would be in California in the next 20 years.
Fascinating. Greg Bledsoe with NBC LX. Thanks so much. That does it for us. I'm Gotti Schwartz for Now Tonight. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.